is the UK ready for the future compute? It's quite a big title, right? It's quite a big area, but we've got some amazing people to walk us through this. And as I said at the beginning, think about where we are right now, where we're heading, and what we need to do to get this right. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we will get going with a bit of a discussion. I've got some questions they'll be glad to know to ask them, but also we want a bit of interaction. So any Q&A, any questions that come in, of course, please be aware that everyone will be able to see them because they're in the chat. Please do pop them in the chat, and then I'll try and weave them in, guys, if that's all right with you, as we go forward. So let's kick off. We are also sorry that Professor Tom Rodden, who's the Chief Scientific Advisor at DCMS, isn't able to join us today, but Anna and Ollie have joined from DCMS. So Anna and Ollie, maybe we'll start with you. Anna, could you just introduce yourself and say hi?
Of course, thanks so much, Sue, for having us. And apologies, everyone, that you've got a slightly less fantastic panel than promised. Ollie and I will do our very best to fill in for Tom. You've got two of us because we're covering both bases here. My role in DCMS is leading the Secretariat for the recently announced external review of the future of compute, so very much on topic. And I'll let Ollie introduce himself and let you know his connection to Tom.
Two for the price of one. And yeah, I work for Tom, and also I am supporting Anna with the technical and science advice that's going into this review. So we're delighted to be here and participating today. Nice to meet you.
Great to have you both, two for the price of one, as you say, but by no means lesser. It's brilliant to have you both with us. Thank you so much. David, perhaps I can ask you to, great to see you. Saw you last week during London Tech Week, but could you introduce yourself to everybody in your role?
So, Dave Snelling, the title is actually all of a sudden out of date as a result of London Tech Week. We've launched a Center for Advanced Cognitive and Advanced Technologies, and I will be the director of quantum computing within that team. And the history of my past, I've been in the UK since 1982, but prior to that, I was with a computer startup long since defunct. I practiced programming the Cray one, and then went to try build something that would beat them. So yeah, I'm as old as I look, and looking forward to moving quantum, AI, HPC, and all this stuff forward, and particular focus on getting this stuff commercialized within the UK setting.
Yeah, we'll definitely come on to that, I'm sure. And
Absolutely.
look, you've got so much experience and so much background here. It's it's not about age, it's about experience, right? So it's great to have you with us, David. Thank you so much. Adrian, good to see you too. Perhaps just could you introduce yourself and your role to everybody? But thanks for being with us.
Hello, everybody. Hi, my name is Adrian Lovell. I'm a CTO here at Hewlett Packard Enterprise. On the theme of the Cray one, Cray is one of our brands as Hewlett Packard Enterprise. So Chris Phillip earlier mentioned Frontier, the exascale computer in the US that Hewlett Packard Enterprise built and put live last month. And the UK supercomputer Archer 2 we built and put live earlier this year. So hopefully share a bit today about our thoughts about how some of those more traditional feeling supercomputers, how we leverage more advanced technology. So Frontier, for example, is also the biggest AI machine in the world, but people just talk about it being a supercomputer. So hi, everyone.
Well, great to have you with us. And you're absolutely right. Into getting some of that devil of the detail is actually going to be key. But seamlessly onto AI. Brett, great to have you with us from TerraFlow. And of course, AI is key to this conversation, right? But I'm about to leap into my first question. Please, before I do so, introduce yourself to everybody.
Sure, yeah, I'm equally as excited about AI, and I love to see the initiatives of what we're trying to pull together and use this incredible set of computing and understand how we make it work in. For me, the most important part is the commercial space. So I'm a co-founder at TerraFlow.ai, and we really focus on trying to make AI work in large enterprises through the art of data engineering and machine learning.
Sure you'll all agree, an excellent panel to get into this discussion. And we're going to talk a little bit about the technologies themselves and, of course, the commercialization, but perhaps where we are right now in terms of adoption and use, looking at the ecosystem and how do we build, Field of Dreams, build it and they will come. So how do we build it and how do we get that right? and not just building it, but how do we make sure people use it? So the accessibility thing, but also I want to touch on a bit later, how do we get this right from an ethical point of view and a responsible point of view? Because this is going to raise these technologies and perhaps not just the future compute, but the power of compute and where we're heading, right? This could raise other questions and other issues that I think we need to be thinking of as well, and to make sure that we get the future right. But perhaps back to where we are right now and looking at, and we've already talked about, I see obviously a theme being the convergence and the way that all these technologies fit together. I'd love to talk a little bit about where we are right now with the technologies that we see, or rather that you guys see, is starting to converge, and how that convergence is happening and how it's driving perhaps trends or market take up or adoption. What are we seeing right now in terms of, where we are in commercial applications as well throughout the economy? So who wants to kick us off with perhaps actually David, maybe if I could ask you, what are you seeing in the market right now? What are the technologies that you're starting to see that really converge that help?
So one of the things that we have engaged in quite extensively is that the bridging technology of annealing that sits between classical computing and on into then eventually being the quantum kind of thing. There's a lot of demand out there for the annealing application is optimization, just in general. Almost anything you want to get to work better, you can stick it in, whether it's people, processes, whether it's chemical design, whether it's drug discovery. Even the fragment stuff he talked about is the kind of thing that fits in the optimization space. Give me a better set of molecules to start with. And we found that in that space, having an edge of a little bit that says quantum tile, in this case, quantum inspired technology rather than actual quantum computing, gives people the motivation and energy to try something new. And so what we're seeing across the market is now a bit of an emergence of industry being more willing to take a few tender steps in the water where they can't see the bottom already. And oddly enough, this is also true in places like finance, which are typically one of the very, very conservative parts. I mean, I remember going into a bank once and trying to sell them something new and fancy. And they said, who else has bought it first? Oh, no, you're the first. And they were not the least bit interested. It's only those, if somebody else had done it, we probably would have had a sale, but no one had. So it was that. But even those kinds of companies now are getting interested in how do we move from where we are to be ready for the future of compute. And that tends to cover data analytics in the first instance, then AI, and then eventually rolls into HPC and quantum down on kind of a roadmap.
Brett, I'd love to pick up on your point about the AI. Is that what you're seeing in terms of that appetite and that interest to kind of start to use the technologies in a commercial activity now? Because obviously we're thinking about the vision and the future and where we're heading, but what are you seeing right now?
We still see a lot of prototyping in the AI space because the business model's really difficult to quantify. And the rationale is everyone started off with sampling in the world of AI, trying all these optimization use cases and getting varied results. And as they start to dig into it, I think they're starting to realize they have deeper problems, especially in the larger organizations. And those deeper problems tend to come from the core data sets. Data is messy right now. And, it's the old adage, right? You're putting rubbish in, you're going to get rubbish out. But the demand to fix the data, the demand to get the right application stacks, model stacks in place, the operational stacks, the skill sets in place, happening all in parallel to drive that value in the end result once you've deployed the models and starting to get the actual tangible return on investment. That seems to be there right now. I think we're sitting with a little bit of a lag as people are trying to throw human horsepower to solve these really messy spaces with this massive, there's definitely an insatiable demand to use the high performance. Sometimes I think that traditional compute is doing enough, well, it's doing a lot more than what they've currently got in their legacy stacks. So that's also quite exciting for them. And I think that's also spurring on different sets of questions. So once you open up the data set, once you learn a whole lot about what you can do with artificial intelligence, the business model tends to roll quicker and quicker and quicker. And so we're entering that next stage where it's, well, how do we get teams and teams of data scientists to be more effective, more efficient, get their ways of working better, start getting the transparency we need to justify the models and the investment that we're putting in the space. So that's really good to see that kind of scale from large enterprises to medium corporates. And I think if we're sitting on, right at the front when it comes to quantum compute and high performance computing, that should be really exciting. I think the question today is, how do we accelerate that? How do we unlock the doors to get into the space a lot quicker? And Ilana, for me, was a bit of an eye opener. So I'd love us to all kind of dig a little bit deeper and try and explore, well, how do we help them accelerate the calibration issues? How do we accelerate the bridge that we've got? And I keep thinking about various ways of how we manage compute these days. Are we thinking about that in the high performance space and quantum computing? And what I talk about there is containerization. That's a massive trend within enterprise because everyone's modernizing the application sets and you're modernizing your data stacks. Let's please not go through another set of legacy rebuild evaluations as we try to use this new technology stacks. Those are kind of concerns that spring to mind. I'm going to stop there because I can go on forever. I get too excited about this.
No, it's such an exciting topic as well. And you're right. I mean, the containerization has been the topic being talked about in the cloud as well, and the cloud industry and the cloud sector. And it'd be interesting to see how that comes into this. Before I go to Anna and Ollie, and I was going to ask Anna and Ollie just so that you can think about it in terms of how is the the future of compute review going to, is that how will it help draw out some of those questions that Brett was talking about in terms of what we need to be thinking about? I want to go to Adrian first because I saw you nodding along in terms of I'd love your reflections on what David and Brett were saying. Is that what you're seeing right now? And also, is that convergence conversation what is happening within your world and the commercial activities that you're involved in? Does this resonate with you in terms of where we are right now and where the conversation's going?
Yes, most definitely. I think it is. Data is the core of the challenge a lot of organizations are facing, regardless of whether they're commercial or governmental. It's silos of data, often decades old, that suddenly has got all this useful stuff trapped in it. And how the heck do we get at that data without breaking all the existing processes? So that seems to be a core problem across. But the organizations that are really not intended to be a pun, but accelerating here, are the ones that are beginning to make access to the new technologies pervasive across their organization. So rather than saying we need a team of data scientists because they understand AI, for example, let's now go and teach them about our data. Let's make AI available to the people that already understand the data structures and the ethics of accessing that data and the T's and C's and all the things that we govern data by today. What we're seeing is the real people at the advanced and the cutting edge are making tooling available to those people, because actually the tooling around AI has come on so much that you don't have to be a data scientist to use it. And a lot of the research that we're doing in HPE around quantum is less around building qubits like our friends in Fujitsu are doing, and some of the other firms that are looking at quantum. But for us, it's more about how do we develop the programming around it so we can make quantum available to people that don't really need to understand quantum physics. And that's where we believe the future is getting in the long term, is just making these technologies pervasive in the same way a spreadsheet is pervasive today in organizations. I mean, that's really simplifying things, but actually days gone past, there would be a group of people that would use the spreadsheets in the central room, and now everybody uses it. And the same is true of these other technologies to just accelerate use cases.
Yeah, I'm going to come on to vision and where we might be heading, but thanks, Adrian, for giving us that view, and fascinating, and already many questions in my head. But Anna and Ollie, I wanted to get your view and your thoughts on, I suppose, as you approach the review, is what you're hearing as well? Does this resonate with you? And also, Brett kindly kind of teed up a question of, there are many questions that are coming to his head even today, right, that we need to be thinking about in terms of how do we get this right. And that's going to be a part of the review, right, going forward. I don't know, Anna and Ollie, who wants to kick in or jump in.
I'll jump in first and pass to Ollie, thanks. So absolutely, we're going to be starting the review with an eye to convergence with all kinds of other areas of related tech. I think Minister Field may have gestured towards this earlier, but he's actually running a roundtable jointly with the BEIS Minister next Monday, specifically on that topic of convergence between high-performance compute, AI and quantum. Government always has to have its own boundaries and dominions set, but as far as possible, we'll be working across those. We're joined up with colleagues who are working on, for instance, the quantum strategy. We've got embedded people in the team from the Office for AI. So very much an eye to looking ahead. So the review is not just about how we're using compute now, but really trying to focus on the opportunities, the use cases that haven't been explored yet, the potential for building value and prosperity in sectors that might not know how to use this technology or might not be able to in the next 2-3 years. But by the time we look towards the later stages of the decade, that's where some of these opportunities are lying. So absolutely, I think we're in listening mode as much as announcing mode on that. But absolutely, that's the perspective that we're starting from. Ollie, did you want to add anything more on convergence?
Just a couple of observations, really. Look, I think that the first one would be that if you sort of think about classical computing and the sort of the high-end use of sort of traditional HPC or HTP machines, you sort of have this very much research first. Industry takes a lot of time to catch up in terms of the sort of demand for classical compute systems. So you could see that the sort of frontier here is being driven by research demand. I think about AI and I wonder if that's a different situation, because actually the sort of pace and rapidity of commercialization of AI is such that, we were talking to one data center provider the other day, and they were talking about a client that was after 30 megawatts of power to run one of their NLP models, which is an incredible amount of compute and sort of far in advance of what I suspect a lot of research where it's at the moment in terms of demand for compute. So I think there's sort of something interesting about how these different communities are colliding and sort of what the whole looks like in terms of demand, and then a sort of question about what does government and sort of public services at large, what role in terms of provision of what sort of capacity and capability. Those are interesting questions that we'd love to explore. And then I think just one of collision, because the other point I'd like to make at this stage is that we have spoken to communities, and often it's been a sort of traditional sort of, here's the sort of classical modeling and simulation community, and here's this sort of new AI community, and yet much of what we're talking about, and it was never more well emphasized than at the International Supercompute Conference in Hamburg this year, was this sort of idea of hybridization, where you're sort of getting this interesting collision of a lot of classical simulation together with sort of enabled and accelerated AI within that, to sort of provide you with a sort of interesting hybrid workflow, and therefore the sorts of demands on the system and also the collaboration required from these communities is going to be a sort of really interesting challenge in terms of synchronizing this and making it all work overall. And that's just sort of looking at it at a system level. Clearly, we're sort of interested in looking at it from a countrywide perspective. And so one system might be different from another one, but actually, what does that entire ecosystem look like? We'd really love to explore that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about data in silo, but I think increasingly the conversation is going to have to be that tech isn't in silo, right? We're already seeing this, right? And I love, Ollie, your kind of technologies colliding, or the collision of technologies, and how we're going to get this right. And perhaps it's a conversation, it does feel like we're in a different place right now than we were even maybe 5-6 years ago. But thinking about not just where we are right now, but seamlessly where we're heading into the future, I want to kind of turn to that kind of the aspiration and the vision, and ask our panel what should be, in their view, and forgive me, DCMS colleagues, I'm going to go to industry first, but please, follow up. But what should the UK's, aspiration, vision be for the future compute capability over the next, I hate to say it, you know, 10, 15, 20 years, you know, where should we be looking, and how can we accelerate here? How can we get rapid scale? How can we get the ecosystem going in a way that we need? You know, what do we need to get it right? You know, is it inward investment? Is it supporting people here? How do we encourage more companies to think about this? And you know, so vision, aspiration for the UK. What should it be? How do we make it happen? And to that point, that DCMS colleagues talked about, industry and government working in partnership is going to be key here. But I'd love to get people's views. Adrian, can I maybe start with you on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that to start with, I think the Future of Compute review is vital, and as quite rightly pointed out, probably should have been done a couple of years ago. So it's great that we're cracking on and doing it, because for a large multinational firm like ours, you know, we're investing in the US, we're investing in the EU. We need that long-term stake in the ground to really invest resources into the UK like we want to do. So that's definitely key. But I think that there's all sorts of other components that you can't just do technology in a bubble. There's the whole talent conversation that I'm sure we'll come onto later. But then there's just the straight supporting capability. Compute is inherently a challenging thing to place, because you've got to place it where data is. So where's the data existing today? Is it in the country? Is it out with the country? Do we want to have a data strategy as part of that compute review? I would suggest we do, as vitally. But also, you can't just start talking about exascale systems and mass AI-driven systems until we understand the power distribution network of electricity in this country. If we look at Frontier in the States, that's 21 megawatts. The next one that we're building is called Aurora, again in the States, and that's going to be 60 megawatts, which, if I do some, you know, back of the envelope calculation, that's, you know, 50, 60,000 homes at least worth of electrical power, plus electrical cars. You know, we're going to run out of electricity, much less sustainable electricity. So we have to include all of these supporting things, as well as the core technology and the programming and all the things that we're used to talking about in technology forums. We kind of need to get bigger, because what we're tackling is much bigger than historically what we've used to do.
So David, we need to think bigger here, and is that your view as well, or how aspirational do you think we should be in terms of getting this vision right? You know, it's a lot of people say to me, oh, you know, 15, 20 years is a long time in technology looking ahead, but do we need to be looking that far ahead?
Well, I think Adrian definitely hit on one of the challenges, and I do think that the longer term view is important. There's a need to not just prepare for the next UK supercomputer. Okay, it needs to be, what do we need to put in place for the next after the next? And energy use is going to be one of those winners. I mean, they just, for example, you've got the as a UK asset, you have the ARM architecture and technology, and it's power focused, and we've put it into the Fugaku, which unfortunately just last month at Hamburg lost its position at the top of the top 500. But we're still on the top of the Green 500 and still on top of the applications. And part of that is because of the energy efficiency. And the work also announced at Hamburg by our CTO Vivek Mahajan was that we're on track with our next architecture with the Monaka, which is also ARM based, and it's looking at a 10 times better performance per watt than what we are with Fugaku, which is already a world winner. So it is definitely the kind of technology that needs to be looked at in the future and planned for. And absolutely, I remember in my days of green data centers trying to make sure that you not only put it where you could get the power, you could get the cooling. So, you know, Scotland starts to look really good for the cooling, but not so good for the data access. Those kinds of, you know, geopolitical questions start to become challenging. No, absolutely agree on that one, Adrian.
Before I move on, because Brett, I'd love your view on this. David, any other bottlenecks or any other challenges you think, therefore, with that future that we need to think about? You know, sustainability and energy, I'm sure we'll come on to, but what else do you think we need to be thinking about?
I'm tempted to branch away from technology, and that's where that we're going to, in technology space, that the integration between different types of systems and so forth are going to be critical. Yeah. I mean, one of the really great examples that's it's kind of a digital twin kind of challenge is the use of something like supercomputing to do tsunami modeling so that we can build an AI inside a laptop that in a moment's notice can tell you how to evacuate certain corners of Tokyo. Okay. And it's that, okay, thousands and thousands of simulations of imaginary tsunamis to program a laptop-based AI. And it's this kind of integration. So the integration of these technologies is definitely one of the technical bottlenecks as well. I suspect we will get on to the commercial bottlenecks, and I'll talk more about that anytime you want.
Yeah,
I think I'd just like to come back and say, I think one of the other things that and it's almost back to what I was saying in the introduction, it's when we talk about these technologies becoming pervasive across the UK, for them to be pervasive across the UK, we need to stop just talking to technologists, because actually we need the whole UK to become a technologist, or they're not going to be able to use these technologies. Much like 20 years ago, we taught everybody how to use a word processor. You know, we need to move this conversation away from, it's wonderful to talk as technologists in a group and talk about the long-term future of where we want the technology to go, but we can't lose sight of how we need everybody else to use it, or else it's kind of pointless making it in the first place.
yeah, I think we'll come on to that when we talk a little bit about, if you build it, they will come. Well, how do we get them to come, right? And the accessibility. But Brett, love to come to you on this point of, are we being aspirational enough? It's 15, 20 years, in the future. And then if it is, how do we rapidly scale? How do we make sure that we are getting the right, I suppose, ingredients for the UK ecosystem to grow? I love your views on this.
I'm just thinking of a meme, right? 15 years from now, you've got this meme, and it used to be where there was a storage device, and now you've got a little chip, micro, whatever chip, or where there was the IBM processor versus where we are. And so let's accelerate in 15 years' time. Who cares that it's quantum behind everything? We are not going to care. So I totally agree with you guys. It's business. It's getting that knowledge across business, helping them generate the use case. So the biggest takeout I got from Ilana was, give us use cases, please, as many use cases as possible, because we're engineers and technologists, and we're sitting back and we're trying to guess, and you're trying to make us sell into you. We are not salespeople. Bring us these incredible opportunities and help us work on it. And so I think the way that, as government, what I'd be doing? Brand it up. UK is quantum computing, or UK compute. It is the biggest space that the whole world goes to, and it's a branding exercise. Get people excited. I think I've had the privilege of working in large legacy banks. I say it's a privilege because it's a nightmare. But there's so many problems that you've got to solve. And the way we solved it in one of the banks that I worked at was turn the bank into one sexy place to learn how to innovate, do incredible things. And so this bank became this hotspot of innovation, and everyone wanted to work there. It was incredibly easy to grab up resources rather than scraping around, promising scholarships and stuff like that. So let's turn UK into as hot an ecosystem from a branding perspective as Silicon Valley is to cloud compute. And I think that is a 5 to 10 year journey in itself. And it might just feel like it's not technology, but actually the multiplier effect of branding and creating this future image that really we, as users, and when I say users, technology users, we shouldn't care what sits behind it. Because right now, I can tell you what, if someone's using BigQuery on a Google stack, they have no idea what compute is sitting behind it. And that's the state we're going to be at. And we're going to look fondly back upon these kind of conversations and go, remember those days. David, I'm going to have a bit like you one day. And
it's kind of like programming a Cray 1 in the old days. That's how you.
Yeah, you're spot on though, because it's what we always say. It's a team sport. As soon as you try and do it by yourself, game over.
To that point, Anna, and maybe I'll come to Ollie first. That great passion, Brett. I love it in terms of, right, how do we position the UK as the place to do this? The place that can get this right. And obviously, David, with your new role and your new investment and others as well, there's a lot to shout about here in the UK. And I have this conversation, a lot of people talk about, oh, the metaverse, how will the UK thrive with the metaverse? It's like, we have, you know, the pieces of the puzzle. It's about putting them all together. So we have some real strengths. So love to get your views on that. You know, is that something we could do with the Future Compute Review? Set that vision, set that that exciting future ahead. But also then, you know, your views on, we need to position the UK for success, but we also need to work internationally, right, on this as well. This is not just about the UK.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right, Sue. And Anna will sort of come on to a bit of that sort of big picture and ambition stuff. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that colleagues on the panel had made, and just to sort of heartily agree with Brett around, I think, you know, it was Arthur C. Clarke that said that technology, when it's sufficiently advanced, it effectively is indistinguishable from magic, right? And I think that this is the sort of point about accessibility. How is it that you know, do you provide the sort of power of advanced compute that isn't some sort of awful archaic command line interface, which is, you know, something that I've had to deal with for too many years. And you just, if you want mass adoption, you cannot expect a generation of businesses and areas of research that are new to the sort of compute that we're talking about get on board with those. So you do need it to be a little bit more magic. And I just wanted to sort of play with the idea, because I think the time thing is really important. And certainly we can look to the likes of the US or Japan and take our cues from where I think governments there have had very sort of long-term planning initiatives and the sort of interesting results that that's had with the sort of community ecosystem that's sprung up around it, the partnership with businesses, some of the really sort of positive reinforcement cycles they've had there with sort of technological development and, you know, succession of their systems and so on. So I think that's really interesting. But the thing that I wanted to pick up on is actually, rather than just the time, the sort of breadth of what we're talking about with ambition here. And I think, you know, whilst compute for us in terms of the review is core to that, our ambition is really to look at the system as a whole. And, you know, we've already mentioned things around skills, and we'll come on to that in more detail. It's super important. Upstream, of course, we're looking very deeply and in the midst of a chips crisis at the moment, and sort of the supply and design of semiconductors is the sort of the very start of this, I would suggest. And then if you look at the compute itself, well, yes, of course we need the data, but we also need to think about where we're positioning these systems. You know, we sort of talked a little bit about, you know, the difficulty of perhaps landing sort of very sustainable data center with the data. Well, what about the businesses that need access to it? Where are they? In which part of the country are they traveling all over it, or do they need to access physically these systems, or can it all be just done in some sort of modern cloud interface? And where is it that you suddenly need the performance to actually have to get your data and yourself to the system itself? You know, you need that level of coupling and performance. So I think, you know, I'm asking lots of questions because we're just at the beginning of this review, but I just wanted to sort of set some of the stock out there in terms of not just time, but actually the sort of breadth of ambition for the review too, and then handing on to Anne.
Thanks, Ollie. And I think I'd probably start with the government's overall ambition for science and tech, which is already set by integrated review and is incredibly ambitious. So the ambition is out there to be a science and tech superpower. I think when we compare that to where we've reached in relation to compute, I think this is probably a point in our history where we wouldn't necessarily say we're at the forefront in the way that we have been, you know, in many decades past. And the integrated review is really clear about the importance of science and tech, not for its own sake, but because it's critical to prosperity, it's critical to security, and we touched a little bit on global influence earlier as well, both in the sense of collaboration and also if we think about it more from the competition angle. So I think there is a really big ambition. I think where we'll be looking in the review is actually, where do you need government to help meet that ambition? There are, I think, industry stakeholders and partners have been giving us lots of information about where the market's going to help solve the problems. Some of the build it and they will come, but this is a field where there are certain things where you either need the kind of clarity and signalling that we've touched on already from government just about the direction of travel, and there are also a set of types of intervention that are primarily for government or government partnerships to make, and we can see that across the international landscape. So I think for us, it's not so much the overall ambition, but it's looking at the particular needs across all of the different sectors, size of businesses, research, government itself, and not just in terms of the technology, but those other pieces that we'll come on to, enabling environment, skills, to make sure that we can create an environment that matches that and set a direction that will achieve it in the coming decade or so.
Yeah, talking about creating the right environment, and we'll come on to some of those topics later on. But we've had and don't worry, I'm trying to capture the questions as well. We had a really good question in terms of how do we maximize opportunities for UK tech companies to meet the UK tech's future needs as well. So how do we work internationally, right? But because this is a global approach, obviously organizations look globally, but also how do we perhaps, I think the question is, how do we build and how do we encourage the UK tech companies to grow and help address this issue? I don't know if anybody wants to come in there, or any thoughts about how do we get that right?
Well, one of the things we're definitely looking at, particularly for getting the tech companies up, that feeds in with international collaboration. Because one of the aspects of our Center for Cognitive and Advanced Technology, I'll start calling it CCAT now so that everybody knows what I mean. So one of the objectives of the CCAT is to enable small to medium enterprises in the UK and Japan to cross-fertilize both nations. And I think that those kinds of little mechanisms that we can use, so we would have an SME come into a CCAT session, work with a user and a problem and a data, whatever the challenge is, probably encouraged by government as a government's contribution to say, this is something that should happen. Bring these people with the data together with the SME, and then export that to Japan, and then vice versa. So those are the kinds of things that we can do that work on this both. And I know Adrian will be with me on this, because as a mother multinational, being able to both collaborate and focus on domestic activities is a bit of a balancing act. And so one of the best ways to do that is through cross support of SME engagement.
Yeah, Adrian, do you agree?
Yeah, totally. And I think the power of somewhere like the UK, we're fortunate because in a global world, we sit in the middle of the time zones, and we shouldn't undersell the importance of that. But I mean, probably not for a conversation today, but something that's very, very, very important is something that the Treasury are looking at, which is the UK actually a hospitable environment for startups? And that is going to be key to all of this, because if you look at some of our nearby neighbours, they have massive burgeoning AI startup communities that we probably need to catch up on. So there is an element of the financial system we need to look at, and the availability of capital and all those good things, which is a bit challenging to talk about in the current climate, but we need to talk about it because we're talking 15, 20 years. Where do we need to be? It's not an overnight change. But I think the other piece to it is the core infrastructure for those firms to access. I would say not so much the underlying compute that they need, because I don't think that's a challenge for that many people of the smaller tech companies today. Maybe the larger ones, but the smaller ones less so. It's in the locations that they need it, which is often geographically boundary limited based on the data laws, which again, another topic for another day potentially, but equally as important. But the piece is, who's going to do all this work? I don't know about everybody else in the audience, but we struggle left, right and centre to get hold of the people we need, because we're fighting for everybody. And actually the universities are saying the same thing. They can't get it. They're fighting to get the researchers in, and the way you get, it's the same as in business as in research. The way you get the best people is you provide the people the best tools to do the job, and it all trickles down.
Yeah, I wanted to come on to that kind of, the point around accessibility, and we had a few questions in the chat around commercialization as well, which obviously comes hand in hand. And I want to talk a little bit about how do we get companies, organizations start accessing these technologies, right? Because that's key to driving adoption, it's key to driving commercialization. But Adrian, you've started it on, and it's come up a few times by people on the skills and talent questions. So let's go to that first. Talk about this industry and this sector, because how do we ensure that given everything we're talking about and Brett's, passion and vision for positioning the UK as a global place to do, these technologies, how do we make sure we have the UK workforce, the skills and the talent that this sector and other sectors will need to make this happen? I know this is a really key topic right now. I know many of you were at London Tech Week last week, and it was a huge topic there. It came up on every discussion I had, whether it's data or cloud or quantum or metaverse, absolutely everywhere. So we need to get the people in that will enable organizations to leverage and make the most of these technologies and the investment in these technologies. So how important is people and skills and talent to the future of computing, getting this right? Brett, perhaps start with you, and then I'll come to David for views, but this is key, right?
It is key. And I have a view that maybe we haven't really explored much. And that's the hidden seam of immense amount of talent that lies in organizations that spend their time maintaining and keeping the lights on vast majorities of infrastructure applications and compute. And that world I blame for this great resignation, because it's awful. You've got incredible talent just trying to keep the lights on core application servers, and businesses are terrified to even look outside of doing anything very innovative. They terrified to spend the money because they just want to keep their systems alive, and some of these systems are aging systems. And part of me feels if we spend a bit of time trying to help unlock these legacy enterprises, we're unlocking this huge seam, and I keep thinking of it as a seam of gold, right? Locked in this brick or rock work of talent that is both experienced, they understand the business elements of it, they can mentor, they can grow, and they're going to be passionate about growing local talent. So when we start throwing new talent that's got incredible minds, they're lacking the world of mentorship, they're lacking the world of real experience, and we've tied the real experience up in rubbish. How do we unlock that? It's not an easy question, because it's been around for 20, 30 years, and it'll continue to be around unless we start getting a bit more future resilient in our architectural design and our approach to solving these problems. But
brilliant.
there's opportunity.
Yeah, really interesting insights. So David, do we need to unlock people we have in the industry already, and then perhaps how do we bring more people into the industry is what I'm just to follow up on Brett's point. So is it both that we need to solve the challenge that we're facing?
Having worked for a few years with people who still know how to program in COBOL, and were doing it last year, keeping lights on is absolutely part of the business. And there is a huge amount of talent penned up in that part of the universe. The other thing I want to come back to is something Ollie said that sang to me, which is this idea of the indistinguishable nature of magic and technology. And Ilana talked about it this morning, with the vision of being able to go ask the computer your question, and out comes the answer running on the right machine. We released a press release last week or so ago about CAS, Compute as a Service, a vision, and she used the word vision repeatedly, and I would echo that that's what it is. It's a vision. It's how do we get there? And that's where skills come in. Because at Hamburg, I was talking to some academics, actually from Queen's Belfast. The CAS thing with this compute as a service thing, talking to an HPC person who spent 5 hours one afternoon trying to get an extra millisecond out of a single loop, right? Okay, this thing is not going to happen. It's a pipe dream kind of thinking. And yet what we want to do is we want to actually provide that this is magic. And the difference between the magic that we want industry to see and the pain that it will take to create it is what's called skills. And it's in that space that we need to start looking, because we can make it look like magic. That's no problem. And it's through the skills to build that capability, and a flexible place. I like your comment about tools. Put the right tools on the table, and you'd get there. And it's those tools that will bring the COBOL programmers out of the woods and say, yeah, okay, I'll do something new.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
Adrian, love.
And yeah, sorry, Sue. I was going to
No,
say, I think from our talent pipeline, where we're we've been talking, pulling out. There's Anna Brailsford from Code First Girls always starts her presentations with this, which is in 2025 we're going to have 3 million vacancies for software, data, and AI job vacancies in the UK, and we're going to turn out 150,000 graduates by 2025, of which 26,000 will be women. So that's just broken. Whichever way you look at it, we've got a massive skills gap, and the universities, even if they had everything in the world they need, are not going to fill that gap. So we can't just rely on traditional sources as well. So I don't have the answer, but I do have the problem of it's an imminent problem, not a 15, 20-year problem. That's something we need to, as a community, as an industry, address right now, because otherwise in 3 years' time we'll be behind some of the other countries in the world, and talent attracts talent attracts talent. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we need to really start focusing, and that's I know I keep coming back to the talent, and I'm sorry if I'm steering the conversation. For me, it's core to everything, because we're going to run out of people, and that we'll run out of people well before we run out of compute, and well before we run out of electricity, and well, all of these other things. That doesn't mean that you don't need the shiny things to attract the people, but if you run out of people, then they're kind of no good.
Yeah, I think having the right people as well is going to be key to getting that commercialization right as well. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. But Anna and Ollie, I just want to give you an opportunity, because I know skills is a huge area of focus for government. The digital strategy was launched last week at London Tech Week. There was a Digital Skills Council, I believe, that was announced in the digital strategy by Minister Phil at London Tech Week. Are these issues that are going to be looked at by that council and your work going forward? I don't know, very quickly, whether Anna and Ollie, you just want to jump in and mention anything there.
Certainly for our work, I think when you mentioned Build It, and they all come right at the start, I think we would see the it as being skills at least as much as it is the kind of big box. So it's a major theme. I think, like others, we're not sitting on the answers yet, but we're going to be reaching out to stakeholders as part of our call for evidence in the review, and it's absolutely an area where we are keen to hear what everybody is experiencing and think about every idea they've got, so we can weigh them up.
Yeah, great, Anna. And I know it was a key chapter in our quantum commercialization report that my colleague Laura Foster, you saw before, brilliantly drove and published a couple of weeks ago. So key chapter in that report as well. Key report. If you haven't read it, don't look at it now, but obviously look at it later. But that leads us on to that kind of commercialization point. And I know this is something Brett and David and Adrian, you were keen to talk about as well. And we had a question around, on the commercialization, how can we build the quantum fluency of users and technology, both government users and private sector users? How is it best to showcase the art of the possible? And I'm thinking here in terms of how it's important, right, for encouraging organizations to access, whether it's HPC, supercomputing, AI, these technologies. How do we that's key to commercialization, right? It's adoption and use and take up. So how do we make sure that we get this right in terms of access to these technologies? Is that the key to, David, you wanted to, focus on commercialization, and how do we get that understanding of the art of the possible, right? That's got to be key, right, for commercialization going forward, or is there something else that you think is going to be key?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the CCAT is supposed to be one of those tempting little things that will bring people in. Okay, the idea, just as background, is we've got some resources coming. We've got a small version of one of these Fugaku type computers coming. We've got digital annealers. We've got the Fugaku system is now the world's fastest quantum simulator. Okay, so those resources are sitting on the floor in the data center. Can't remember, probably shouldn't say which one it is because that's classified. But they're sitting on the floor in the data center, ready for people to use. And again, the skills to use them is one of my headaches. We don't want people to come and not have support. And so that's the kind of thing that needs to happen. But they won't come unless there's some vision of being able to solve the problem. So first of all, they have to have a problem. They have to be willing to come with their problem, and we'll all vote for they need to bring their data with them as well. So users, problems, and data. And then everything else will be there waiting for them. And I think that it's a small experiment. The announcement we talked about last week was 22 million. That's the ground start. That's that's groundbreaking kind of investment. And if we can see the right roadmap for that with the right kind of focus is what we would really need, particularly from government, to say what is it we really need to look at, and then we can go from there. There's nothing blocking that kind of a strategy for bringing together the motivation and the skills.
Mm.
And there's nothing that attracts a skill set more than a problem to solve. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Brett, I think this is the question was around showcasing the art of the possible technology today, and thinking about it in terms of AI. We think about, it is about bringing it to life. It is about if we, case studies of, to David's points, what's the problem that these technologies can help you solve? Is that key to getting, making it easier for organizations to access the AI, to think about AI first? Is bringing it to life, is that the key?
I don't think that's actually the key, to come to think of it. I don't want to poo-poo over the idea of getting sexy case studies and trying to sell it. I put my sales hat on, and it's got to boil down to ye who carries the purse strings, and where's that return on investment? And David, I appreciate 22 million. That's a lot of money for someone to kind of park and put aside and get some form of commitment and see the outcome, especially when you start thinking about what we just heard today from Alana. So, if we're going to go down this route, we need to have pretty concrete business models that are going to support it. They're going to have a return in a very quick period of time, not just the period of time that takes to compute the issue and the challenge that we've got. And that would be lovely, wouldn't it? I think that would be the ultimate business model. Guess what? In the period that we've just solved this, you've got a return of tenfold. Then we're on a money-making scheme. I think that'd be awesome. It probably was crypto many years ago. So I think we got to find this balance. And again, I've always got my branding hat on. You've got to be able to tell a story, and it's got to be really exciting, and it's got to appeal to an area that could get the purse strings there. And David, you brought it up, the digital twin. The digital twin, for me, holds the easiest purse string to get hold of, and that's a cost. And as soon as you start talking to an organization about cost and reducing the cost and being able to scale that out, it starts making sense, and it's really easy to do the calculations. It is also equally an incredibly sexy proposition that you can bring together, package it up, take it into the market, show a multitude of industries how you can completely revolutionize it. And the end user, and I keep thinking, BBC documentary, that's really interesting, about how we're using digital twins in all aspects of industry. And it really becomes maybe the Netflix showcase that everyone wants to watch. So it's just you buying the hearts and souls of the use case, but the use case is tied to a cost benefit. Cost benefit's far easier to go after when you're innovating. When you're innovating and trying to generate revenue, forget it. We've all been there. This is going to create an upside. Sure. I'm sure it will. Fantastic. Go do it yourself. But bring me cost savings, especially in today's economies. Yeah.
David, I think you're agreeing, but Adrian, love to bring you in, getting that proposition right and making it real for organizations. Is that the key? And kind of what we were talking about before is it's not the tech itself, but it's what it enables, right?
Yeah, it's back to the in when you're looking at the commercial entities anyway, it's down to show me the money, as Brett says. I think somebody don't test me on this, but I'd be willing to put some money down on the table to say, go pick the annual report from any company on the FTSE 100 and you'll find AI listed in their annual report. I pretty much guarantee it, which means it's a discussion point, at least at the board level, which means there's an appetite. The question is, do they pick the UK to fulfill that appetite? And the answer there is all the related topics we've been talking about today. But actually, if I take it back to Brett's point of where we very, very started, which is where does the data reside? So I think a key part of our longer term strategy for the commercialization of all of this is our legal and regulatory framework around data. And this is a guy coming from a financial services background, so of course I'm going to talk about regulation, but the regulatory framework around data becomes critical to everything, because actually for a corporation, every company will say our number one assets are people, our number two is our data. Well, as a country, we should kind of be in the same framework. We talk about our people, and then we talk about what do we do to make data accessible to people that's public data, or protect the privacy of data that we don't want to be public data, and how do we make that not just core tenement of all legislation, of all ethics, of all of these good things, but actually how do we make sure we don't kill off innovation by saying, well, all data is locked down and nobody can access it, because then again people will go somewhere with a little looser regulatory framework. So it's that balance. And then we get onto compute and saying we'll put layer compute and provide access to the tools and the software and everything on top, but if you don't get the other bits right, you can't. You'll end up doing it little bubbles, and you won't drive that commercial value prop at the top of the tree, where the chairman of a FTSE 100 company goes, brilliant, look how successful we were.
It's really key. It's already forming in my mind a little bit of, key ingredients and what you need to get right, layers, right? And I think the regulatory and legislative framework is one layer. And of course, we've just seen the government's proposals around the future direction of data protection, data governance in the UK that was launched at the end of last week, and that's key. And I think, Adrian, to what you're talking about. But another, and we're very quickly running out of time, but I did want to get this in, and we had a question around how do we make sure that we mentioned power, and how do we make sure we're aligning to technology aspects with the SDGs, the sustainability goals, and also I really wanted to touch on this question around, which again, to your point, Adrian, I think the UK is coming at it from a position of strength around how do we get this right from an ethical and a responsible, approach as well, in terms of what the future compute could mean to the UK and to people in their everyday lives. And David, I know you touched on sustainability before, but in my mind, I think we do have a digital ethics community here in the UK. We're talking about sustainability, right? We're talking about the potential impact of these technologies. That means to me that the UK is positioned quite well to have that conversation. Just very quickly before we close, just wanted to get your views on that, perhaps.
Sorry, who did you want to start?
Sorry, David, go ahead.
Okay, so anyway, so one definitely on the idea of having the pieces in place beforehand. I think at Tech Week last week, Keith, you talked about it as build the seatbelt before you build the car. And that's what the ethics framework, the data protection framework and so forth has to be right. But just because you have a seatbelt doesn't mean you can't build a stinkingly fast car, okay? And I think that's what we have to do, particularly with AI and data ethics, for example.
Yeah.
The other thing that comes into the whole compute review is that it's pretty clear that having domestic compute capability, and that's not just silicon side, it's everything else, is a national security issue, okay? And it needs to be part of the strategy so that it is addressed with the same kind of urgency as keeping the lights on.
And that was part of the conversation. The UK Defence AI strategy was released last week at Tech Week as well, and that was core to one of the conversations that we had around that last week. I think the piece though that Sue you mentioned we got to catch up as a technology industry. It is the SDG, it's the green credentials of all of this, and we have ARM in the UK, which is a fantastic asset to the country. But nonetheless, there's no getting away that compute in its current form consumes an awful lot of power, and we don't generate that power in a green and sustainable way as a country. Now, the short-term roadmaps for every technology stack is more electricity, more power, and by short term I mean 10 years. Not, when we're talking 20 years, short term is 5 to 10 years. We're not going to be reducing and getting more efficient compute in the next 5 to 10 years in the mainstream. So what are we going to be doing in the short term and in the longer term? I think the jury's up, subject for debate, but things are going to start getting better when we start hitting about 10 years, but we can't wait for 10 years. So we do need to do something now to make sure we don't blow every climate change promise, because everyone talks about aviation, but goodness me, look at the IT industry for damage we do to the planet.
Yeah, it's the key area. And in fact, plug, we have a tech and net zero conference looking and exploring where we are and where we need to go to only next week at Tech UK. So check out our website for that. Brett, I'm coming to you for the very last comment, very short one in a minute, but just Ollie and Anna, just maybe one of you, because I'm doing terribly here at the sharing. I've completely run over time, so I don't know who wants to take this, but just reflecting this conversation, this isn't just about the future of compute review, right? We need to make sure that this dovetails into a lot of other pieces of work that DCMS have going on right now. I'm thinking of the AI white paper, I'm thinking of the data protection, I'm thinking of the, there's cybersecurity work going on. There's a lot of other aspects. We need to find a way of bringing these all together, or rather through the future of compute review, we need to touch on these other areas, right?
See, I think just given time to agree, right? So I think we were already thinking about this as a review of compute in the broad sense. What do you need to do about this enabling environment? How do you ensure that you do this responsibly? The integrated review gives us that framework for thinking about not only prosperity and innovation, but also security. So it is broad in terms of its topics. That we've touched on lots of things where we'll be trying to gather as much evidence as we can. So a plug of our own for people to contribute through Call for Evidence, which will be coming up in the coming weeks. And thanks for having us.
No, Anna, Ollie, we're definitely Tech UK very keen to input into that. Brett, I'm going to give you 1 minute, just any closing remarks or thoughts from you, and then we'll close up the session. But it's been fascinating discussion.
I think we're just in for a really exciting ride, right? And if we can all pull together, we're going to figure this out. Let's get business excited. Let's invest in the research, because it feels like we're still quite way off. And let's try and get the architecture right, that it is reusable within the current direction that we're taking business. Yeah, really exciting. Thank you.
Yeah,
really appreciate
thank you.
Chuck a bold goal out there. Let's not sit on the fence. Let's really go for it.
Let's go for it, right? Why not?
That's it. Absolutely. When I kicked us off this morning, I was like, this is an exciting time. You're absolutely right, Brett. What a ride we've got ahead. And just thank you so much for all the panel, for your passion, your input, and your experience that you brought to this. It's probably raised more questions and more issues that we need to delve into more, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And we're definitely up for the challenge here at Tech UK to figuring this out and working with you all, and of course our DCMS colleagues in making this